Hey everybody, welcome back to 90 and Out. I'm your host Timothy Holt, and today I'm going to talk about the Psalms, or the book of Psalms, specifically collectively, not reading from any one psalm, but just talking about the entire collection known as the Psalms. So there are 150 chapters or individual psalms in Psalms. It is unlike any other book in the Christian Bible as well as in the Jewish holy texts. So the Jewish holy texts and the Christian Old Testament both contain the same 150. However, there's some slight number differences between the Greek and the Hebrew, namely with Psalm 9 and 10, and then later in the 40s. So, but total, there's 150. They're broken into 5 separate books within that overall anthology, and they were probably collected or assembled somewhere around the 200s BC, so during the Second Temple period. And they range the entire gambit of Jewish history, Hebrew history. So most of them are credited to King David, but he certainly did not write all of them. Some historians credit 73 of them to David, which he is mentioned as the author by name, and some credit to other ones, making a total of 75, because they're referenced in the New Testament as being authored by David. So he is definitely the most prolific writer of the Psalms, but is certainly not the only one. Asaph also is credited, so is Moses and Zechariah and various other individuals. The sons of Korah, you can go to Numbers to see who exactly the sons of Korah are. By the way, just an FYI, and a little shout out, I'm getting most of my information from multiple sources today. Some of it is from memory from my own personal study and research. Some of it's also from Wikipedia. I know that a lot of people don't like using Wikipedia or referencing it. However, the reason I'm using Wikipedia for this reference has to do with the very end of the article that they have, which is quite extensive, and it is all of the references. So here's some of the references that are contained in the bibliography. So there's the Jewish Study Bible by Oxford University Press, the New Oxford Annotated Bible, New Revised Standard Version with the Apocrypha, also by the Oxford University Press. There's John Day's Psalms Continuum, Stephen L. Harris, Understanding the Bible, published by Mayfield, The Songs of Israel by John Hayes. The list just goes on and on. So the other one is Got Questions. So gotquestions.org is pretty cool website. Check them out if you're interested in pretty much almost any subject that I can think of. They have an answer to some degree, and some of it is I don't know, because, well, we don't know. So some things about the Psalms that I find fascinating are those 5 book separations. So let me get back up here. I'm scrolling. So the 5 book separations are pretty interesting. If you're following my playlist and series on Book 1 of Psalms, it's covering Psalms 1 through 41. The first 2, Psalms 1 and 2, are like a prelude to the entire book, which is pretty cool. And then the rest of them, starting in Psalm 3 through 41, are credited to David. Now, there is one exception to this, and it's Psalms 33. Psalm 33 doesn't have a author in it. It's unknown. However, it's generally credited to David because it's collected with, well, over 30 other psalms explicitly credited to King David. And then it also follows a similar format and writing style. So it's generally accepted that it's credited to David. However, it's not explicitly authored by him. So, for example, other psalms, such as you can check out the video where I read Psalm 34. Psalm 34. So Psalm 34 starts out, of David. That's the first two words in the psalm. So it's pretty obvious that the psalm is David's. Another one would be Psalm 32. It starts out with, of David. Again, pretty obvious. So first book of Psalms is generally considered the Davidian Psalms. Book 2 is Psalm 42 through Psalm 72. Book 3 is 73 through 89. Book 4 is 90 through 106. And Book 5 is 107 through 150. Now, I will mention Book 5, depending on who you talk to and what reference material you look at. Some say Book 5 is Psalms 107 through 145. Now, the reason for this is just like Psalms 1 and 2 is kind of like a bookend on the front. Psalms 146 and through 150 are like a bookend on the end. So depending on what collection you're looking at or what translation you're looking at or which Bible scholar you're reading from or looking into, some will include those with their respective books, such as Book 1 with Psalms 1 and 2, and Book 5 with Psalms 146 through 150. However, others will leave them as a bookend, so a prelude and a postscript, if you will, which is pretty interesting. Also, 116 of the 150 Psalms have a superscript or a title. Again, a lot of them are of David or a psalm of David written for the chief musician. Many of them are expressive on who they're written for. Several of them say for the harpists or for the flutists, because these are songs. They were meant to be sung. So other authors, Solomon is credited with 2 psalms. However, we know Solomon could write some poetry because we have quite a bit of it with most of the book of Proverbs as well as Ecclesiastes. However, 50 of the Psalms are left unauthored, or we don't know who they are, who wrote them. They could have been a collection often used in or Sabbath day services and things of that nature. I wanted to take this video and really dive into what the Psalms are. The New Testament, over 2/3 of the Old Testament quotes in the New Testament. So the New Testament quotes the Old Testament a lot. Jesus of Nazareth, one of his most well-known quoting of the Old Testament, he's quoting Deuteronomy, passage in Deuteronomy as well as a passage in Leviticus. And he's asked, what is the greatest commandment? We all know the 10, the big 10, but what is the greatest? And Jesus of Nazareth replies with, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul, everything that you have, all that you are. So that's the first greatest commandment that's in Deuteronomy. It's almost a word-for-word direct quote in Deuteronomy. Now, but he doesn't stop there. He says the second is likened unto the first, to love your neighbor as yourself. And that is, again, almost an exact word-for-word quoting of a passage in Leviticus, stating that exact thing, that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. When one of his disciples asks, who's my neighbor? He says, everyone. Essentially, he says everyone. The least to the greatest, everyone is your neighbor. Doesn't matter who they are, they're your neighbor. And he uses that parable of the Good Samaritan to really illustrate that point. So he's quoting However, Jesus of Nazareth is recorded as quoting the Old Testament extensively. And then the Apostle Paul, also known as Saul of Tarsus, it quotes the Old Testament quite a bit. Actually, the Old Testament's quoted in, I believe, every book of the New Testament. But 2/3 of all of those quotes, which they're numerous, 2/3 of them come from the Psalms, which is pretty impressive, I think. 2/3 come from the Psalms. Now, the Psalms in the Christian tradition, in the Christian canon known as the Bible, is in the middle of the Old Testament. We have the Pentateuch, or the books of the Torah, books of the law, first 5 books. Then we have some history books. Then we have the books of poetry, and they're right in the middle with Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. However, in the Jewish tradition, Psalms takes a different place. There's 3 sections to their Old Testament, if you will, what we consider in the Christian community as the Old Testament. In Jewish tradition, they have it broke up into 3 different ones. It's the law, the histories, and then the poetry, or the poetic writings, collectively known as the Psalms, because Psalms is the first book of those 3. So it includes Proverbs and some other writings, miscellaneous writings. So rather interesting, fascinating. If you like poetry, I highly recommend reading the Psalms. That's one reason why I'm going through book 1 in my reading, 90 and Out reading series, book 1 of Psalms, because Psalms, there's something about reading them that just flows. It doesn't really matter, it seems like, what version I read from. The language, the structuring just flows off the lips. The other part of the Psalms that is interesting is it contains a pretty common word that is not translated well, and there's high speculation on what this word means. I've covered it briefly in a couple other videos where it's come up in that particular psalm. And that word is Selah. Not the music group. There's a Christian music group that is called Selah. We're not referring to that group, although they may or may not have, I don't know, gotten their name from this word. So Selah. So Selah is found in 2 books in the Bible. The first one is Psalms, where it appears 71 times, which is pretty frequently. And then it also appears 3 times in Habakkuk, one of the minor prophets. So Habakkuk, in his chapter 3, uses it 3 times as a break or a separation in stanzas with a prayer that he's recorded there. So in the Psalms, it appears 71 times. It's a fascinating word. I personally find it pretty fascinating. According to gotquestions.org, the word Selah is found in 2 books of the Bible, and I'm just reading it. But is most prevalent in Psalms, where it appears 71 times. It also appears 3 times in the 3rd chapter of the minor prophet Habakkuk. There is a great deal of uncertainty about the meaning of Selah. Most versions of the Bible do not attempt to translate Selah, but simply transliterate the word straight from the Hebrew. The Septuagint translated the word as daplasma, a division. Well-meaning Bible scholars disagree on the definition of Selah and on its root word, but since God has ordained that it be included in his word, we should make every effort to find out as best we can the meaning. That is reading straight from gotquestions.org, which is a really fascinating website. I highly recommend if you want to study the Bible or search more online, go to their website, check them out. So several different translations. Some are to hang, some are to pause, some are to praise, lift up. However, I think my theory is, my interpretation is, it's kind of a mix of those things. So I remember back in vocal music in high school, we would have a rest. When you look at sheet music, you'll see different notes, and then there will be pauses, rests signified there. And that's how I read Selah. It's a rest because it almost always appears at a natural break point in that psalm. So if we take one of the psalms where it appears, let me just pull it up here. Where is it? By the way, you can check out that video. I'll have a link to that where I read this particular psalm, including Selah, in it. I'm just looking real quick for it here, if I can find it. That particular one. Right here. All right, so Psalm 24, a Psalm of David. If we scroll down here, you'll see, and I really like how the Authorized King James Version separates this, because they separate it more in a stanza format than some other versions. But verse 6, it says, "This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face, O Jacob, Selah." And if you read and visually look at it, it's a natural breakpoint in a stanza. So I think it is a musical notation. My interpretation is it's a musical notation that's not easily translated, but it means to pause or break and reflect on what has been said or sang, and look to the one that the psalm is speaking about. So this particular one, Psalm 24, is just titled A Psalm of David. That's it, Psalm of David. So check that out. I find a lot of this pretty interesting, pretty fascinating. I'm getting back to the article here, so get back on track here. So according to Herman Gunkel, I think that's how you say his name, Gunkel, he categorized the Psalms as 5 different types of songs. So the first type is hymns, songs of praise to God, creation, history. They're just songs praising God or Yahweh. They often say from the Mount of Zion and various other aspects of the spiritual world. And they're hymns. We have hymns in church today, and a lot of those hymns are based on the Psalms. And then there's laments, communal laments, or laments for the country, for the people. Lament is basically sorrow. If you're lamenting something, so if you are lamenting something, you are sorrowful. That is lament. So there's a book in the Old Testament called Lamentations, and it was written by Jeremiah, and he laments, or he is sorrowful. He is full of emotion and sadness for the state of Israel. That's what lament means, and there are quite a few lamenting psalms. He breaks it down into 2 types of laments. There's communal, where the psalmist, the author, is lamenting. He's sorrowful for the state of the community, the people, and their relationship to God. And then there's individual laments. One of them that is pretty common, we referenced, is the one where David, his son. So David, yeah, he's kind of an interesting character. At one point in time in his life, he sees a woman next door taking a bath and calls her into his palace, and then he essentially rapes her. Lack of a better description, he does. He impregnates her. She ends up having a baby. Well, in order to cover up this infidelity and blatant, obvious sexual sin, he has her husband killed. Yeah, he has him killed. He sends a letter to the army, which is fighting a battle, and tells the general, put him in the middle of the fight where it's the thickest, the heaviest, and as soon as the enemy attacks, withdraw everyone but him. His name was Uriah, but him, and leave him there to die by the enemy's hands. Basically, kill him. And Uriah was one of David's trusted men, which is definitely a low point in David's life. Well, the prophet Nathan comes to David and basically tells him, God's seen what you did. God saw the whole thing, the whole cover-up. You're not getting out of this. You deserve to die. And according to the law, the king is not above the law. And the law says that if you commit adultery, if you steal another man's wife, you're supposed to be punished by being stoned to death. Yeah. Executed. However, God is going to have mercy and save your life. He's going to spare your life, but that son of yours that is being carried by Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, is going to die shortly after birth. You're going to watch your son die as a natural consequence for your adultery and, contracted murder, essentially. So, life for a life, a tooth for a tooth. So, David writes this psalm, and he pours out his heart to God in lament. It's a personal lament. He's sorrowful. He's repentant. However, his son still dies. But it's a cool psalm. It's contained in Book 1. Check it out. Another one is royal psalms. These were ones for coronations, marriages, commemorating major battles, and then the individual laments. And then the last one, which we hear a lot of, I think these definitely get the focus in most church services and studies. They are individual Thanksgiving psalms. They're the opposite of the laments. They're praises. So one very common one is Psalm 117, Psalm 117, which is one of my personal favorite. It is one of the first Psalms I ever memorized. I memorized it as a child. It also happens to be the shortest chapter in the entire Bible. Psalm 117. Oh, praise the Lord, all ye nations. Praise him, all ye people. For his merciful kindness is great towards us, and the truth of the Lord endures forever. Praise ye the Lord. That's the entire psalm. That's it. That is a psalm of thanksgiving or praise. It's well known, it's well quoted, it's quoted quite often because it's short, it's concise, and it is all about praise. So, in conclusion, when somebody talks about the Psalms being all uplifting and praise to God, they're not entirely wrong, but the Psalms are so much more than that. The Psalms are reflection. The Psalms are spiritual hymns and royal songs, commemorating songs. They're songs of lament over a people who turned their backs on God and were met with massive devastation as a result of being foolish. They're psalms of personal lament written by poets who just cried out to God in their sorrow and deep sadness and despair and depression. They're psalms of thanksgiving, of joy and excitement and exuberance, like Psalms 117. Praise ye the Lord. Praise him all the nations. Not just the Hebrew nation, but everyone. Praise Yahweh. So think about that. And now, after watching this video, I hope you've got a good idea, a basis on what the Psalms are and what they were. They were written during the Jewish history or the history of the Hebrew nation. Some of them are credited, if you look at the Jewish tradition, there's one psalm credited to Melchizedek. There's one credited to Adam. That would be Adam from Genesis, the first man ever created. That's in the Jewish tradition. They're referenced as those. And they range all the way into the minor prophets. So granted, most of them were written, a large amount were written by David. However, Asaph, he wrote quite a few. The sons of Korah wrote quite a few. Solomon's got 2 of them in there. It's a massive collection of 150 psalms. And for my video series, I have just taken book 1, Psalms 1 through 42, which I think is a good breakdown. I hope to do more videos where I will cover the other 4 books as well in the public reading series. But this is just an overview to give you a better idea of what they are. Because the Psalms are not like any of the other books in the Bible or Jewish sacred texts, because it's an anthology of anthologies. So if that makes sense, there are 5 books within the book of Psalms, and each book has a specific collection within it. Book 1, all David's. I think it's book 4, if I remember correctly. I might be mistaken, but it's all laments. They all have a structure to them, and they were all written individually. So the Psalms are the most quoted of any Bible text ever, but I'm amazed when I try to discuss the Psalms with people that they seem to just think they're all praise songs, or they're all church hymns, or became church hymns. That is not the case at all. They run the entire gambit of human existence in our lives. So, like I said, my favorite psalm, Psalm 117, is short, it's to the point, but it is a praise psalm. Another psalm that's quoted a lot is Psalm 23. You probably know this psalm if you have much affiliation with Christianity and at all. You've probably heard this psalm at least once in your life. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And it goes on. It's a very common psalm referenced about the provision of God and how he grants peace and takes care of us. So there's something in the Psalms for everyone, and it's great poetry reading. So I highly recommend reading it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Pick it up, read it for yourself. I have read from 2 versions of the Bible. The first one is the Authorized King James Version, circa 1611, and the second one is the Lexham English Bible, which is produced by Logos Bible Software, circa 2010. So check those out. They're both word-for-word translations of the Christian Bible. You can also check out some thought-for-thought translations, such as the New International, which seems to be the most popular. So check them out, read it for yourself, and I hope that you have enjoyed this and got something out of it. I hope to do more of these videos where I just do a quick overview of the particular book and what it contains. So thank you, may God bless you, and read it for yourself.